So we're going to keep going on with our book of Ezekiel, and we did skip a week, but we remember what we talked about 2 weeks ago. Does anybody remember? We've been Ezekiel, yes.
The Mount of Temptation.
We talked about the chariot throne. Talked about the vision. Talked about Solomon's temple a little bit and the chariot inside the temple and some of that. So this is going to be a fun one this week because we get into the weird stuff. Okay? Not that Ezekiel's not, it's got some weird stuff to begin with, but we get into the stuff that people read and then they're kind of going, this makes no sense. What is the purpose behind all this stuff? And so that's where we're going to go today. And so we're going to talk about the sign acts of Ezekiel. Does anybody know what a sign act is? What would you assume a sign act is? What would be your guess?
Something you do that tells you something?
Something you do that tells you something? Yeah, I would say yeah. It's obviously with a purpose, right? Ezekiel is unique because he gets these words from God, but then he has to live them out. He actually has to physically go do stuff that relays his message, and some of them are really weird. I mean, just really weird stuff. And so we're going to look through these, but there's a bunch of them, okay? And we're going to go through them one by one, but obviously it's a specific message that Ezekiel's trying to relay. And who is he giving this message to? Do you remember where he is?
He's still in Jerusalem.
He's in Babylon now. He's by the Kibar Canal. He's with the exiles. And it's a small group of them there. And he probably has a little place where he's living. And he goes out and he does these signs for these groups, these exiles there at the Kibar Canal. Okay, so you got to remember, he's not in Jerusalem. He's not even in main downtown metropolitan Babylon. He is by the exiles there outside by Mornipur, Kibar Canal, and that's what he's doing. And his message, his signs are for a purpose, obviously. He's going to do sign acts that deal with Jerusalem. He's going to do sign acts that talk specifically about the land. Okay, now you could say, well, that includes Jerusalem. But it's bigger than that because Israel is a lot more than just the city of Jerusalem, right? The land is really important in ancient Judaism. It's important today. Why? Why is the land so important? Because God gave them that land, right? And so there's debate over that. There's all kinds of fighting over that goes on. But the reality is that God gave them the land, and so God also set some things before them and said, if you do these things, what's he going to do with the land? Kick them out, right? And so he's going to exile them. And so that's ultimately what ends up happening. So a lot of his messages deal with the land. We're going to talk about the temple. Okay, we probably won't be into the temple too much this week, but next week we'll be talking about what he sees when he actually ends up in Jerusalem. The Spirit takes him there and shows him some stuff happening at the temple that will make it pretty clear why God's not real thrilled. Okay, so we'll look at that one next week. And then he gets into just other judgments, other things that they've done and other things that are going to happen. Sign acts were a visual illustration. So that was the thing, is it's kind of like going out and doing a little performance and hoping that your audience, after they watch the performance, will go, I think I know what he means. I think I know what the story is here. I know what he's trying to say. And that's what the purpose of these are. Let me give you an example of one. So here's in 1 Kings, okay? It says, it happened at that time that Jeroboam went out from Jerusalem, and he accidentally, he says that accidentally, met Ahijah the Shilonite, the prophet, on the way. Now he had clothed himself with new clothing. That's Jeroboam. He's in this new coat or whatever he has on. While the two of them were alone in the field, Ahijah took hold of the new cloak which was on him and tore it into 12 pieces. Then he said to Jeroboam, take for yourself 10 pieces, for thus says Yahweh, the God of Israel, behold, I am about to tear the kingdom from the hand of Solomon, and I will give to you 10 tribes. Now he could have just walked up and been like, hey, you're going to get 10 tribes, and he's going to get, but no, we had to destroy the guy's coat to make the point, okay? Sign act, okay, that's what it is. It's a sign, an illustration to make the point. Okay.
Remember such a thing.
Yeah, you'll definitely remember it. Yeah, that's the thing. You will remember it. Now look in here in Isaiah 20. In the year the commander-in-chief came to Ashdod when Sargon the king of Assyria sent him, and he fought again to Ashdod, and he took it at that time. Yahweh had spoken by the hand of Isaiah, son of Amos, saying, Go and loosen the sackcloth from your loins, and take off your sandals from your feet. And he had done so, walking naked and barefoot. How would you like to have this sign? You got to carry this one out. Then Yahweh said, Just as my servant Isaiah has walked naked and barefoot 3 years as a sign and a portent, which is like a warning, against Egypt and Cush, so shall the king of Assyria lead the captives of Egypt and the exiles of Cush. Being a prophet would have not been a lot of fun, because it's like, by the way, take your clothes off and run around naked for 3 years. It's like, this doesn't make any sense. And people probably thought these guys were crazy. I mean, they're looking at them going, what's the point? But there was a message, and these guys had to live the message out sometimes with these signs, these attention-grabbing, weird things that clearly for the thinker who is going, I know he's a prophet, what's this mean? They had to come to a conclusion, and that was part of the message. Okay, Hosea.
Wouldn't that make you not listen to him? I mean, if you saw this guy running around naked for 3 years, would you be listening to what he said, or would you be going,
That's a great question. So I'm going to repeat it because I want to make sure when people watch to hear the question. So the question is, would people not listen to him because he's basically acting crazy? I think that's true. I think there's people who had to stop and immediately know, is this guy a prophet or is he not? If they think and they know he's a prophet, if there's something that's done that they can say, we know for a fact he's a prophet, everything he does at that point, they have to pay attention to. They should. I think some people say, well, he's a prophet, but they would dismiss him on his actions. They may not like the message. But yeah, I think there was people sitting there on both sides of the fence going, should we listen to this guy or should we not? For example, Jesus comes, does he do a lot of sign acts? Could you say he did a lot of signs? A lot of them are miracles, right? He did a lot of things where he would come in and for a message. I just read it this week. Jesus tells the guy when they lower him in from the roof, remember? It's like, your sins are forgiven. And the Pharisees have a fit over this. And so what does he tell the guy? Do you remember? Yeah, exactly. He tells the guy it's easier to forgive your sins than to say pick up your mat and walk. And so what does he do? Pick up your mat and go home. Okay. Now that would have caught everybody's attention. But were there people on both sides of Jesus? There were some that thought he was crazy or they thought he was bad, and then there was some that thought he was the greatest thing. Yeah, he gets called the devil. I mean, at one point the Pharisees are accusing him of casting out demons by Baal. Okay, so obviously even if you did things, people would kind of be on both sides. I think it depended on, do you know this person's from the Lord? What would you look for? And I think Isaiah and these guys had that. Some people didn't want to hear it. They didn't like what they were seeing. They did do some weird stuff that would definitely be like, I think that guy might have a screw loose, right? It might be something wrong here. Now here's one. This is maybe the worst one. At the beginning when Yahweh spoke with Hosea, Yahweh said to Hosea, Go, take for yourself a wife and children of whoredom, because the land commits great whoredom, forsaking Yahweh. In other words, I want you to go marry a prostitute. How would you like to get that call? We would be going, this is questionable judgment. Hosea, not good decision making. Don't do it. And here he's being told by God, no, you're going to experience what I experience, is what it's like to be joined or married to a prostitute, because Israel has prostituted themselves. So these sign acts have they take a lot of toll on the prophet. You have to remember, there's a lot of things they're carrying with this. Ezekiel has 9 sign acts that he relays to the people. He does 9 different signs. That's kind of how scholars have broken this down. You might be able to consolidate it or even add it, make it a little bit longer, but 9's kind of the consensus, I would say. They're not necessarily chronological. So the first sign act does not mean that's the first thing that happens. Okay? He gets these sign acts, but it's just kind of a hodgepodge of signs that are going to unfold. But you can't say the first one's going to happen first and the second one's going to happen second, the third one's going to happen third, as Ezekiel reveals these things. Okay, not necessarily chronological. Okay, gotta love that because it just makes it more complicated. But that's just how sometimes these things work. Okay, so Ezekiel has these signs after his first vision. That's in 593 BC is when he has that vision of he sees God. Okay, he's by the canal. He sees God. Basically, the first few chapters of Ezekiel. These events represented by the sign acts were not fulfilled until 586 BC. So you have to remember, when we're going BC, you're counting down. So how many years? Got 4 plus 3. We got 7 years of time that he's been doing sign acts. So this isn't like he sat down for a weekend and did all of these things. These are things that took place over a number of years, okay, that he was doing before these people. Okay, so here's the 9 signs. Okay, we're going to go through them. We'll see how far we make it. So we got the brick siege. Okay, we're going to look. I'm just naming these. I kind of tried to sum them up really quick as I named them. So the brick siege, the barrier between Ezekiel and the brick. Okay, Ezekiel laying on his sides, lays on both sides for a period of time. The barring of Ezekiel's arm. We're going to talk about that. Ezekiel being bound up, so he gets tied up. Okay. Food rationing for Ezekiel. He's told specifically what he has to eat and what he has to do. Number 7, food cooked over feces. Yeah, that sounds like a great one. Okay. Ezekiel shaving his hair and dividing and scattering it. And number 9, Ezekiel saving some pieces of hair. These are weird, aren't they? God does some weird stuff. I mean, I've read through this. I'm going, man, this guy, I could see where people could have looked at Ezekiel and like, this guy's clearly lost his mind. And a lot of scholars and a lot of psychologists, who look at the book of Ezekiel and read it, they think Ezekiel suffered from they will say he suffered from mental illness. He had schizophrenia. He had some problems with women. He had all kinds of issues. And then the Bible, scholars and the Christians come in, they go, no, he's just doing what God told him to do, which is really weird because it does look odd sometimes. It does look really odd.
If we did any of that now, if that happened...
Yeah, they'd commit you to a mental institution if you did it today. Yes, yeah, they probably would. That's probably true.
If we blamed it on God.
Yeah.
Especially
Yeah. If you blamed it on God, yeah, they would definitely send you to the nut house, that's for sure. Right? So these signs lead to a whole bunch of questions. When you go through them, there's questions that are going to pop up. Of when, how these things were done, what's the time frame of them. For example, were these signs given quickly or were they over a long period of time? In other words, did he do these things pretty fast or was it more strung out? Because some of these things you couldn't do at the same time. And if you're bound up, how are you going to do these other things? So scholars read that and they go, they must have been this one, and then this one, and then this one. And we'll talk about it when we get into them, but maybe over a period of time. How was Ezekiel able to do things while he was bound? Right? Some will even argue that Ezekiel got up in the morning. Okay, this is just an example. He gets up in the morning. He goes up and does his normal daily routines. Then he goes out into public, and he kind of does his show, or he puts his illustration on for the day. And then when the day is up and the people are not watching and everybody's gone home, what does he do? He packs up for the day, he goes home and does the rest of his activities he needs to do, and then he does it again the next day. So it's not like he was 24/7 in this condition. There's a belief that it could be that. Okay? Possible. How was he able to do physically some of these things? You lay on your side for 390 days. Probably not going to be real good for your health, right? There's certain things that you go, how is he able to do that, like physically for that period of time? And so if you're talking 24 hours a day times 390 days, it may not be good. But if he did it as a display for a period of time every day, it maybe makes sense that he could physically carry out some of these activities, okay? Not to mention that God can do the miraculous. I mean, at one point, I'm trying to think, is it Elisha that he tells, I want you to basically run? And he ends up running. He pulls his robe up and he runs some crazy distance. And God allowed him to do that. And I don't know, maybe he was just in great shape. But God can allow people to do unbelievable physical things, Samson and so on, because he's using them. So just some questions to ask. Okay, sign number 1. You ready for this one? Here we go. Son of man, take for yourself a brick, and you must put it before you, and you must portray on it a city, Jerusalem. And you must build against it siege works, and you must build against it a bulwark, and you must heap against it a siege ramp, and you must set up against it camps and put against it a battering ram all around. So what is he telling him to do here? Build a sandcastle. It's basically get your little models out, get your miniatures out, and you're going to play tabletop games. That's kind of what he's doing here. He's telling him to take this brick, and this was probably like in the process of being baked. They would carve into these things as they were being formed. And he basically creates a display of Jerusalem, sets it down, and then builds a little model around it of a siege on this brick. And so it sounds goofy. This adult guy's out there playing with bricks, and he's building siege ramps, and he's got his models. That's what he's doing. Okay, that's what he's got going on. Then he says, take for yourself a plate of iron. Well, let's go back, actually, before we go into that one. What's the purpose of this? What's the reason for this first sign?
A blueprint.
It's a blueprint. It is. That's exactly right. It's a blueprint because you have the city of Jerusalem on a brick. And what's about to happen to it? It's going to be attacked. There's going to be a siege. Now, remember, Ezekiel, that hasn't happened yet. Ezekiel is in exile. But Judah is still functioning. Jerusalem is still standing, okay, until a little later on when they then rebel, and now Nebuchadnezzar comes in, lays siege to it, and wipes the place out. But in Ezekiel's day, Jerusalem is still standing. Okay, there has not been a siege laid to it at this point. Nebuchadnezzar has just been kind of putting puppets in there to try to keep control, and they keep rebelling, so he has to, so he's kind of taking these groups out. But he hasn't actually sieged it yet. So you see Ezekiel, you're one of the exiles, and you see Ezekiel playing in the dirt with a brick that has Jerusalem on it and these siege ramps. And if he's a prophet, a true prophet, what does that mean? Jerusalem's going to be sieged. It's going to be sieged. And that's what's coming. Jerusalem is going to be sieged. Okay? Number 2. Take for yourself a plate of iron, and you must place it as a wall of iron between you and the city, and you must set your face against it, and it must be under siege, and you must lay the siege against it. It is a sign for the house of Israel. Okay, the key phrase at the very end of that. What is this? A sign for the house of Israel. He does not say house of Judah. He says house of Israel. Now that's unique, because Israel's been gone for years now. The northern kingdom is not even around. They've been destroyed. Who's left? Judah. That's it. And he says this is a sign for the house of Israel. So who's he talking about when he says house of Israel? How does God look at the kingdom? The whole thing is Israel, right? The whole thing. And it's a sign to show them where he's at with them. Now, one thing you're going to see when we go through these is Ezekiel represents somebody in this illustration that he's presenting. You got the siege brick, you got the siege works around it, he builds all these things. And then what does he do in this one? Yeah, he puts this iron thing. In fact, the barrier, there's the word in Hebrew, Mahabat Barzel, and it literally is an iron griddle that you would cook on. Okay? And he sets that between him and the little siege, illustration, his little model. He puts that, and then he's on this side of it. So who does Ezekiel represent in that illustration? God. And what does the barrier mean? I'm between you. Yeah, in other words, I've set something between us. Remember, God dwells in Jerusalem. I mean, that's where, he's in the midst of the city, in the midst of the people, and now you have him creating a siege. And is there meaning in that? Who built the siege around Jerusalem in this first sign act? Ezekiel did, right? So Ezekiel builds it. Well, who does Ezekiel represent? So who really brought the siege? Not Nebuchadnezzar. God did. God's sieging Jerusalem through Nebuchadnezzar in judgment. It's not like some crazy, tough Nebuchadnezzar decided one day to do this. This is God bringing judgment against Jerusalem. And he is against it. He's separating himself from it. Okay? That's what this griddle is here. Okay? Placed between Ezekiel and the brick. Okay? Obviously the brick, we know who those represent. He tells him to set your face against it. You see that a lot of times in Scripture, which literally means I'm against it, obviously. When you're looking upon it and you're saying, it's now judgment, it's my, it's kind of the source of my wrath, or where I'm going to deliver it to. It's obviously their sin is the problem, right? We're going to talk a lot about that in the next week. How would the exiles, okay, so you're in exile. How do you see this? What does this mean to you? Jerusalem's under siege. Ezekiel's sitting there and he's got this giant griddle between him and the city. They're going, okay, this guy's crazy, But what is he really saying to them? Who's bringing the siege? Why are you in exile? Not because Nebuchadnezzar got some wild hair to go raid. Because God is against you. He's against you. It's supposed to be this wake-up call. Remember he said it's a sign. It's supposed to be a wake-up call. Number 3. He says, and you, lie down on your left side, and you must put the guilt of the house of Israel on it. You will carry their guilt the number of days that you will lie on it, and I will give to you the years of their guilt according to the number of the days. 390 days, and you must bear the guilt of the house of Israel. When you've completed these, then you must lie a second time on your right side, and you must bear the guilt of the house of Judah 40 days, a day for each year, a day for each year I give it to you. Okay, so what's Ezekiel instructed to do now? Lay down, right? So he's got the siege set up. He's got the thing, between them. And now he says, I want you to lay down on your side. I want you to lay down on your side. Now, Israel gets commented to first here. How many days is he supposed to lay on his side to bear the guilt of Israel? 390 days. That's a long time to be laying on your side, isn't it? Judah's much less. Why are they different, do you think? Why is Israel's so much longer than Judah's? Huh?
He had better kings.
They've had better kings? They did. Judah didn't fall right away, did it? Eventually they did, but Israel fell first in the north. And then after that, the kingdom of Judah fell years later.
Was more godly?
They were godlier longer, maybe we should say.
Okay.
They obviously both weren't godly in the end. But yeah, they had some good kings. They didn't totally fall as quickly as the northern kingdoms did. That's probably the idea here, is that God's being just with. The north was obviously worse than the south. But they ultimately both ended up in the same place. Exile, right? Defeated and in exile. Okay?
So he goes out and lays down for 390 days.
Yes, 390
His
days.
daytime job.
Yep. That's the idea, is that he would go out during the day, potentially, and he would lay there, and he did that for 390 days. Then he rolled over, and he did it for 40 more. So that's a lot of days. 430 days of laying down on your side. That's why scholars read this and they go, physically, I guess if God did some miracle, it's possible. But how did he eat and drink? What could he move? Could he get up and go do anything else? Because if he's just laying there, there's no way he'd survive it. So I think it could have been to display, just during maybe his 8 to 5. Get up at 8, got to go lay again today because that's my job. And that's what he did. Okay.
What does it mean? Put the sin
Put the guilt.
on yourself.
We're going to talk about that. Yeah, the guilt piece of bearing the guilt of Israel, bearing the guilt of Judah. The idea is that your job now is for their sinfulness, you have to lay on your side. And so it just immobilizes you for these periods of time. Okay? So the idea is it's representing the fact that there's not going to be anything happening for this number of days because you're just basically laid up. Can't do anything. Now, exactly. God is paying a price. Well, God's not really paying a price, but God is not doing anything because of their sin. And if you think about it, what did God tell them under Moses would happen if they fell into idolatry and if they didn't obey his laws? What did he tell them? You're out of the land. You're out of the land. And so all he's doing is just saying, contract agreed. You guys agreed to the deal. You didn't keep it. These are the conditions. These are the provisions of the contract. You have not kept your end of the bargain. And so nothing's going to happen. In fact, he even tells Moses that there's going to be a Sabbath for the land for the times they didn't keep it. They didn't let it rest. And so he's driving them out there so the land can have the rest that they were supposed to give it every year, every seventh year. But they didn't do it. So he's going to make good on his land. You're going to let my land rest. Out you go. So Ezekiel lays on his left side for 390 days. Then that's the northern kingdom. Then he lays on his right side for 40 days. That's the southern kingdom. Okay, a lot of laying on your side. Now, some will say if you tie them together, you're kind of getting the fullness of the whole kingdom. This is how their whole period of time was, that they were rebellious, we'll say, or that they needed to be removed. Okay, these numbers are not agreed on in scholarly circles. They do not totally know exactly what these mean. Okay, and I'll show you a couple things as to why. So this is the Lexingham English Bible. This is the one I use. I just like it because it's a pretty literal translation. But you notice it says 390 days that he laid on his side for the north. Now if I go to the Septuagint, okay, now the Septuagint is what? You guys remember? The Greek translation of the Old Testament. This is the Bible that Jesus would have had, okay? This is the one the disciples would have had. And so if you look at the Septuagint, which is out of the 70, they had the 70 that translated it. They didn't write 390 days. Look what they wrote. Thou shalt lie upon thy left side and lay the iniquities of the house of Israel upon it according to the number of the 150 days, during which thou shalt lie upon it, and thou shalt bear their iniquities, for I have appointed thee the iniquities for a number of days, for 190 days, so thou shalt bear the iniquities of the house of Israel. Different numbers. Why is the Septuagint translator changing this? What's he trying to do here, right? So Ezekiel lays on his left side for 390 days, or could be 190 days, depending on which translation you're looking at. Okay. Now the northern kingdom was conquered in 722 BC by the Assyrians. That's quite a while before you have Ezekiel's day, isn't it? If you calculate 190 for Israel and 40 for Judah, you have 150 years remaining. If you do the math, if you count backwards, you end up at 737 BC. Some scholars will say that's about the time Israel was attacked. So ultimately ending in 722. So they're trying to figure out, is there a tie to when they were conquered, when the Assyrians came in and conquered Israel, and God's saying from the time you were conquered until the time basically that this exile is going to wrap up, or there's going to be a period of time, and is it related? We don't know, because it's not exact. 737 is not the exact date these things happen. It's just in the ballpark. So scholars really don't know. They don't know exactly what these numbers mean. They're kind of weird. And that's obviously the Septuagint translator didn't even totally understand, because they changed the numbers a little bit. Okay. Now some scholars are going to say that the 390 is a period of wrath following the defeat of Jerusalem in 586 BC. So when Jerusalem actually fell, it's this period following that. If you take the 390 and the 40 and then the 430, it's almost exactly the period of time the first temple stood. Some would say it's related to the temple when it was built. Maybe this 430 is the time until the next temple is built, some have thought, because Nebuchadnezzar goes in and knocks it down. And then what happens later on? Nebuchadnezzar's defeated, and then you have the Medo-Persians come in, and then ultimately Nehemiah goes back, and what do? They rebuild the temple. So there's a debate on, is that the time frame? The numbers just don't match exactly, so it's hard to know exactly what these numbers mean over time. It tells them here, when you have completed these, then you must lie a second time on your right side, and you must bear the guilt of the house of Judah 40 days, a day for each year, I give it to you. So he lays on the one side for Israel, and he lays on the other side for Judah. Okay? He's turned to his right side for 40 days, and he's told that term, bear the guilt. Okay? Now, I just want to show you a verse out of Numbers that might give you some idea of what he's trying to get him to think about with this whole bear your guilt stuff. Okay? It says, and your children will be shepherds in the desert 40 years, and you will bear your unfaithfulness until all your corpses have fallen in the desert. What happened? What's going on here in Numbers? They go in, they scout the land, they come back, and they say, we can't take that thing. There's these big giants there. And so what does God say? You're going to wander in the desert for 40 years because your lack of faith has caused you to have to wander. And he says here, you will bear your unfaithfulness for a period of time. It was 40 days, a day for each year. You will bear your sins 40 years, and you will know my opposition. So do you kind of catch the connection there? You're going to bear this for this period of time until it's my wrath or my judgment is complete. Did that with the Israelites when they wandered in the desert. 40 years, right? Ezekiel may not have been in this position on his side continuously. We talked about that. Might have gone home in the evenings and been like, time to, got to do a little workout, some stretches after laying all day, something. Ezekiel 4:7-8 says, "And toward the siege of Jerusalem you must set your face in your barred arm. Then you must prophesy against it. Now look, I will put on you cords, and you may not turn yourself from one side to your other side until you completed the days of your siege." Okay, so he does this barred arm, piece, and then God's going to tie him up. We're going to tie him up. This is weird. It's getting weirder, isn't it? So what's the barred arm mean? This is actually a term they used in the military. You would bare your arm as a warrior about to go and conquer. And so what is God about to do to Jerusalem? He's about to siege them and destroy them. So it's like a military term. You see this phrase a lot in the Bible where it talks about God's righteous right hand, or he'll protect me with his righteous right hand. He uses. There was one thing that comes with this particular sign. Let me show you here. Is in Isaiah 52. It says, "Break forth, sing for joy together, ruins of Jerusalem, for Yahweh has comforted his people. He has redeemed Jerusalem. Yahweh has bared his holy arm to the eyes of all the nations, and all the ends of the earth shall see the salvation of our God." Now, what's is this a positive or a negative here when God bears his holy arm? Who's it doing on behalf of? Israel, right? And it's against the nations. So if you know Isaiah 52, which was before Ezekiel, and you see, bared arm, you're thinking, God's going to protect us. God's got us. He's going to fight on our behalf against Nebuchadnezzar. He's exiled us. He's going to be the one to come in and take care of us. And in this illustration from Ezekiel, what do you have? Ezekiel has the barred arm, except who's it against? Not Nebuchadnezzar. It's against Jerusalem. It's against Israel. And so there has to be no question, is what God's trying to say. No question here of who I'm against. I'm not fighting for you right now. I'm against you, Israel, because of what you've done. Okay? The barred arm could be understood as a sign of deliverance. Not in this case, because he says, set your face and your barred arm, and then he says, prophesy against it. I am against Israel, against Jerusalem. Okay? The exiles are seeing this, and they're going, how do we interpret this sign that Ezekiel's showing us? God is not for us. He's separating himself from us, and he's sieging us, and he's against us. What's the purpose? I mean, what does God want the exiles to do with this information? Turn to him. Turn away from their idolatry, their evil, and put their faith and trust in him. That's what he wants. Who is their strength? Who is really their protector? Who is really their, the one they should be devoted to? That's right. Ezekiel testifies that God is against Israel, and he's not coming to rescue him at this time. That he wanted to make sure there's no confusion here. He's not coming to deliver you from Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar works for him, and he's coming to exile you because of what you've done. Don't think you're getting away with this. Babylon might be conducting the siege, but God's behind it, right? Who built the siege ramps and did the little modeling? Ezekiel. Number 5. Now look, I put on you cords, and you may not turn yourself from one side to your other side until you complete the days of your siege. So he's got to build this thing. He's got to tie himself. He's tied up. There's cords on him, and he can't move until the time of that. Now, again, the question comes down to, is this just during the day? Is this 24/7? Is he tied up? How long is he tied up? What do the cords mean? Why does he have to be bound? Do you think? Why would God want him bound during this time? Who's actually being bound? Ezekiel is. And who does Ezekiel represent? God. I'm not doing anything during this time. There will be no action taken. And he actually doesn't even, I think personally, I'm reading this, I don't think he wanted Ezekiel even by accident to act in a way that anybody would come away with thinking God's going to do something. So he tied him up. You will not move until the siege is over. In other words, nothing. Don't look for anything to happen until this is completed. They will come in, they will siege you, and there will be no deliverance. There will be no acts of God to come in and rescue you. You will be sieged and taken over. He appears to have been bound by God with these cords. We don't know exactly, but it could be a miraculous binding where God just bound him, and it's like you're not moving, He's unable to move from the position he was in, which is key. God is now between him and, Israel with the griddle there in front of him, and now he can't move. And I don't think it's because God's like binding himself up. I mean, he is kind of metaphorically binding himself, but he wants to make sure everybody sees this illustration. They go, Ezekiel can't move. He's not doing anything. And he's against Jerusalem. Okay? Face against the brick siege model until the time is up. Right? So God has made sure Ezekiel cannot, even by accident, alter the message of the siege or the judgment. I'm not going to let him even have a chance to alter this. Okay? Number 7. And you, take for yourself wheat and barley and beans and lentils and millet and spelt. There's your Ezekiel bread, I think. I don't know what's in that, maybe. And you must put them in one vessel, and you must make for them for yourself into a food during the number of days that you are lying on your side. 390 days you shall eat it, and your food that you will eat will be according to weight. 20 shekels for each day, at fixed times you shall eat it, and an amount of water you shall drink, 1/6 of a hin, at fixed times you shall drink it. Okay, weird instructions. You're going to lay on your side, and I'm going to give you your rations while you're going to do that. Okay? One thing to keep in mind, Ezekiel is representing God in this illustration, but who else does he represent at times in this illustration? We're kind of seeing it. You're going to see a duality here. He represents God, but he also represents the exiles, the Jews, because of what's about to happen to him. Okay? It goes on to say, and as a bread cake of barley you shall eat it, and with human excrement you shall bake it before their eyes. And Yahweh said, thus shall the Israelites eat their unclean food among the nations where I will scatter them. Okay, illustration. Here's all your stuff. We're going to make a great loaf of food here, okay? And you're going to cook it over human excrement, and you're going to eat it. And then he gives the interpretation at the very end, the last phrase. Yahweh said, thus shall the Israelites eat their unclean food among the nations where I will scatter them. Is dietary law big in ancient Israel? And so now they're not there anymore. Where are they? Babylon. They've been scattered. The northern kingdom's been scattered. So are they in nations that are all about food cleanliness? No. They're not. They're in places that we would say are the unclean areas. And so where do the people have to be during these times? In the unclean areas, eating the unclean foods. And that's a problem. We don't totally understand that because we just don't deal with the dietary laws. But Paul deals with this in the New Testament because people are still struggling with, can I eat the meat in the, in the marketplace? Yeah, I know it was, it was given to this deity or it was in this temple. Can I eat it? And Paul says, well, yeah, you can eat anything you want. You just need to be aware of the conscience of those around you. But dietary laws were huge. It was part of that being clean, being, kept clean so that you could, be part of God's people. And now where are they? And nobody cares about their dietary laws now because they're scattered. He says, and I said, Lord Yahweh, look, I have not been defiling myself, and a dead body and mangled carcass I have not eaten from my childhood until now, and unclean meat has not come into my mouth. Rarely do you see a, objection from the prophet, and here Ezekiel says, whoa. I cannot cook bread over human excrement and eat it. I have not ever eaten anything unclean. How could you ask me to do this? Right? He's upset by this. And he said to me, see, I will give you cattle manure in the place of the feces of a human, and you may prepare your food on it. So, okay. I'll because Ezekiel has this moment of, I don't want to defile myself. I've never done this. God says, okay, I'll honor that, and I'll change the plan a little bit. Cow manure. It could be just as bad, right? But it wasn't as terrible as the uncleanliness of like a human excrement, having to cook your food over that. Okay. Here's some concerns, obviously. Ezekiel is to eat a very small, so 20 shekels is 8 ounces each day. That's not very much, is it? He was to drink 1/6 of a hin of water, so that's 2/3 of a quart every day. Not much. Right? How did Ezekiel do this during the laying and the binding? See, this is why the question is he doing this as a presentation and then it ends and then he eats this? He's doing it all in front of him. But it's almost like going to a play, going to a drama, potentially. And you're watching this play out and you're trying to figure out what it means. Right? What does it mean that he's eating this? What does it mean that he's bound up? Right? Some scholars hold that Ezekiel did this. This is like his performance. Okay, exiles, gather around. Time for performance today. And then he would do these things. Okay? What does it mean? So the mixture of food items and the portions would have been a meal for the poor. That's specifically items of very, very low value. Nothing great here. This is the poorest of the poor can eat this stuff. Now, who does Ezekiel represent? He represents Yahweh. And who else does he represent? The exiles. What's going to happen during the siege? They're going to be struggling to find food, aren't they? Because when they siege it, they don't let anything in or out. And how do you cook? How do you get fuel when you're being sieged? You got to just start burning what you have. Well, guess what you might have to cook your food over? See, what he's trying to get him to relay is not just that Jerusalem's going to be sieged, but what's going to happen in the walls while this is going on. You're going to have hardly anything to eat and drink, and you're going to be doing everything you can to just survive with what you've got. Very, very, poor conditions. He was understanding that Jerusalem is going to be on the brink of starvation because of the siege. They don't know any of this at this point. Remember, this is before the siege happens. But God's saying, not only are you going to be sieged, but here's what's going to happen during the siege. Okay? Ezekiel kind of has to carry some of that. And he said to me, Son of man, look, I'm going to break the supply of bread in Jerusalem, and they will eat bread by weight, anxiously, and rationed water, and they will drink with horror, so that they will lack food and water, and they will be appalled with one another, and they will waste away because of their guilt. In other words, the siege is going to be bad. And it's going to be so bad that the people inside are going to basically starve to death. And God knows all this is coming. And why is this happening? Last line. Because of your guilt. You guys thought you were going to get away with this. You're not getting away with it anymore. The cooking of food over feces was also for the exiles. That was the thing they were trying to understand is, not only are you going to eat unclean in the nations, but the people in Jerusalem are going to be doing everything they can to just survive, right? They would be among unclean nations. When Jesus comes, who does he go to first? The Jews. Goes to the land, and then from there, out, right? So there's this idea of the clean in Israel, God's property, and the unclean, which is outside of God's property. And now are they scattered? Everywhere. They're not on the land anymore, in the unclean areas. Okay? Unclean nations. And so these meager food and water would be consumed while in foreign lands. Right there in Nippur, where the exiles are, they're probably dealing with this. Israel is defiled, unclean per their sin, but now outside of Yahweh's land among foreigners. It's even worse, right? Number 8. And you, son of man, take for yourself a sword, sharp as a barber's razor. Take it for yourself, and you must cause it to pass over your head and over your beard, and you must take for yourself a set of scales for weighing, and you must divide them. A third you must burn with fire in the midst of the city at the completion of the days of the siege, and you must take a third, and you must strike it with the sword around it, and a third you must scatter to the wind, and I will draw a sword behind them. Okay, this is a weird one. So get a sword, like a barber's razor, and you're going to basically shave your entire face and head, and everything's hairless, right? And I want you to not just throw the hair away, you're going to weigh it out into 3 different groups. And we're going to do something with it. Ezekiel is told you're going to take a weapon of war. Not a barber's razor, but a sword. And you're going to do this. Okay? Why is that significant, do you think? Why a sword instead of just a normal razor? A sword's what? It's an instrument of war. It's an instrument of judgment, right? We're going to see what the hair represents in just a minute, right? Look at this in Leviticus 21:5. This might have been a problem. This is talking about the priests, what the priests have to look like. They shall not shave bald patches on their head, and they shall not shave off the corner of their beard, and they shall not make a cut in their body. This is the requirement to be a priest. You couldn't shave your beard or your head. And what does God tell Ezekiel to do? Cut it all off. So now you have this guy from the priestly class who's standing there in front of the exiles and he has no hair on his face. I mean, there's all kinds of confusions here, all kind of upendings of the past, right? Priests were not supposed to shave their head or beard. So would those watching have determined Ezekiel was being removed from the priestly position? If they know Leviticus, they might have stopped and been like, his priesthood's coming to an end because you can't do that. Doesn't mean they're right, but you could get that. Was Ezekiel in mourning? Some could have taken it as, that's part of the mourning, a mourning ritual. He's lamenting. I would think it's more than that, and I'll show you why in a second. Was Ezekiel being dishonored because he had to shave his head? That's a dishonorable thing to do for a man who's in the priesthood. And I think it could be a combination, but I don't think it's the first one. I think he's in mourning, and I think he's being dishonored. Now, why do I think that? Who does Ezekiel represent? Is he being dishonored? Is he in mourning? Yep. And we're going to see what the hair represents in just a second. Look at this, Isaiah 7:20. On that day the Lord will shave the head and the hair of the feet with a razor of the one hired from beyond the river with the king of Assyria, and it will even take off the beard. This is disrespectful. It's dishonoring. The king of Assyria is going to be dishonored. Okay? You must take for yourself a set of scales for weighing, and you must divide them, and a third you must burn with fire in the midst of the city at the completion of the days of the siege. You must take a third, and you must strike it with the sword around it, and a third you must scatter to the wind, and I will draw a sword behind them. So what's the hair represent, do you think? The people. The people of Israel. Yes. Ezekiel removes the hair. He cuts it into these third kind of sections. It says a third's consumed by fire, a third is struck by the sword, and a third is scattered to the wind. What happens when Nebuchadnezzar sieges Jerusalem? What happens to the people? This is what happens to them. A third of them are killed by the siege. They basically burned the city down. A third of them were killed by the sword. They tried to escape. They came out. They battled. They died. And then what happens to others? They're scattered to the world. And they're in the nations. They're scattered all over. Right? And so the hair represents those people. Now you think of this from the image. You have Ezekiel, who represents God, shaving his head and his beard. And he takes the hair and he does a bunch of stuff with it. God's dishonored because he doesn't have a beard or hair anymore. But who dishonored him? The people. Because he doesn't have them. They've left. They're gone. Right? So the hair represents those people that God has said, I have to clean myself. I have to get you off of me because of your sin. What you've done has required this separation. So what does the hair represent? The city of God consumed by the fire and the siege, the people killed by the attackers, and the people who have fled or escaped to Babylon or have been scattered amongst the nations. Okay, that's what the hair represents. This is the last one, and I think this is the one I hope that you'll keep in mind, because this sounds pretty brutal so far, doesn't it? I mean, you got a siege coming, barely any food and water. People are going to be dying horrific deaths. It's just not, it's uncleanliness, it's scattering. God's not going to deliver us. But then you have this sign. I mean, you must take from these a few in number, and you must tuck them in your hem. And from them again you shall take some, and you must throw them in the middle of the fire, and you must burn them with fire. From it a fire will go out to all the house of Israel. So he has these three sections, but what does he tell him to do? I want you to just take a little bit of hair. I want you to just tuck it in right here. What does that mean? There's going to be a remnant. There's going to be some. There's going to be a remnant. And there's going to be some that are going to be there. God's kind of put them in his pocket because they have not done what the others have done. They're the faithful remnant, right? Some will survive the siege of Jerusalem. There will be some. They'll get exiled. They'll end up. There wasn't very many, but there were some. And when he says you must tuck them in your hem, who does Ezekiel represent? God. God's not being, is he being gracious here? I mean, he could have wiped the whole place out. But he recognizes there are some who are faithful. They are appalled at what they're seeing. When we get into next week and we look at where he goes into the temple and you see what's happening, and there's this man with a scribal case and they're going to mark some things down, you start to see that God isn't just saying, let's throw the baby out with the bathwater here. He knows that there are people that are disgusted at what's going on. And he says, but it's a very small number. Very small number. Could this be Ezekiel? Could he be one of these hairs?
Yeah.
He could be. He could be. Is the remnant secured by God? Yep. Keeps a remnant for himself. Look at this in Leviticus. This is the reason they're where they are. This was the agreement. And I will scatter you among the nations. I will draw a sword behind you. Oh, there's that language. And your land shall be a desolation, and your cities shall be a ruin. Then the land shall enjoy its Sabbaths all the days of its lying desolate, and you shall be in the land of your enemies. Then the land shall rest, and it shall enjoy its Sabbaths. All the days of its lying desolate it shall rest for the time that it had not rested during your Sabbaths while you were living on it. My land will have its Sabbaths, and you're out of here until it's done. Because you didn't follow the rules. You didn't keep the agreement. And so the rest has to come to the land. As for the ones who remain among you, I will bring fearfulness in their hearts in the land of their enemies, and a sound of a wind-blown leaf shall pursue them, and they shall flee like flight before a sword, and they shall fall, but there shall not be a pursuer. And they shall stumble over one another as from before a sword, but there shall not be a pursuer, and you shall have no resistance before your enemies. In other words, I'm chasing you out, and what's going to happen to you? It's not going to be good. Right? There are going to be a lot of them die. A lot of bad things happen to these people. You shall perish among the nations, and the land of your enemies shall eat you. And because of their guilt, the ones among you who remain shall decay in the land of their enemies. And also because of the iniquities of their ancestors, they shall decay with them. Was God serious when he told Israel what he wanted them to do? Yes. We haven't really, next week we're going to get into why this is all happening. I mean, we kind of know because, we have the whole book. But what is God so upset about? Why this? Why come to this, right? And in spite of this, when they are in the land of their enemies, I will not reject them, and I will not abhor them to destroy them, to break my covenant with them, because I am Yahweh their God, and I will remember the first covenant for them, whom I brought out from the land of Egypt in the sight of the nations to be their God. I am Yahweh. So what does he say? When they break the law, they're going to be scattered. A lot of them are going to die. But then what does he say here at the end of Leviticus? I'm not totally abandoning you. I have a plan. I have a purpose. I have a contract, and I'm going to make sure that I keep my part. Right?
This sounds like the Holocaust almost.
Could have been a part of it. I don't know. I don't know where that plays in. But the thing I want you to take away is the little bit he tucks in his hem in the statement is that God is not saying, I'm done with you. He's saying you're going to be judged. There's going to be some changes here. I'm going to wake you up, hopefully. But in the end, I'm going to be faithful and keep my part of it, which is faithfulness. The judgment of Israel will be seen by the world, which can be dishonoring to God when it looks like, you have to remember, supernatural worldview. When the deity is the people get taken over, what does it make the deity look like in that nation if the people get conquered? Weak. He's not with them. He's abandoned them. And they might have had that mentality. Yahweh has officially left us. And he's saying, I haven't left you. You're being punished. You're being judged, but I haven't left. Okay? So the nations are seeing this, and they're like, your God's left you. Move on, guys. And he's saying, no. I haven't left. I haven't left you. The judgment was directly tied to their failure to follow the commandments of God. That's it. You don't keep the contract, there's consequences. He told them, right? This judgment is executed by God, not just a strong nation. Remember who built the siege works? The conditions of the siege would be terrible, causing atrocities and defilement, which we kind of got from that. Lots of bad stuff happening in the city. Here's the bottom line. A nation of Yahweh's that rejects him will fall into terrible judgment. If you can take that away, a nation that is Yahweh's that rejects him will fall into terrible judgment. So hopefully they wake up in the coming chapters, right? That's where we're going to stop for today.